Dark Souls is an incredible game that I thoroughly enjoyed and had a blast playing. But how does Dark Souls 2 compare? Is it superior or just a failed sequel? You might be surprised by what I have to say. Just like in Dark Souls 1, I'll be aiming to collect all achievements, there being a total of 38 I'll need to acquire. So let's start from the beginning. I start my journey in the character creation, where I create the most handsome man you've ever seen. I then chose the swordsman class as I wanted to dual wield swords at the same time later on. I get laughed at by some witches, and I get my first achievement, self-recollection, for completing the character creation, which is the hardest thing to do in the entire game. Inside the tutorial area, I would also experience my first death, not to any sort of enemy, but rather because jumping in this game was different from Dark Souls, so I just ended up walking off a cliff. Promising start, if I do say so myself. I find my way back to the hub area of the game, Majula, which is the most relaxing place of all Dark Souls. There was never a moment in Majula where I didn't feel at home. After picking up my singular flask, I went exploring, where I found a giant gravestone wedged into a tree. Being at this Stone of Victor, I can enter the Covenant of the Fittest, which awards me an achievement. But little did I know that this covenant makes all enemies take less damage and deal more damage to me, which I didn't know for the majority of my playthrough. It also reminded me of the terrible covenant grind in Dark Souls 1. Hopefully there isn't a covenant that requires me to grind for like 8 hours or something to get a single item, right? I then decided to take on my first boss, the last giant. After getting my ass kicked by this 10-meter fossil, I postponed his defeat and leveled up my character instead, which proved useful as the next attempt I would put his species into extinction. Defeating the giant awards me an achievement, which was quite rare in Dark Souls 2 for some reason. In comparison, the second boss, the Dragon Rider, was a complete joke, and I didn't even have to use the cheese that made him fall off the ledge. Just a good old bait out attack and thrust him until I win. However, I wasn't doing a whole lot of damage, so it took ages, but alas, the Rider of Dragons goes down. Just before I went after the next boss, known as the Pursuer, I went back to Majula and talked to Soldarin, who invited me to join the Covenant of the Meek, which I kindly refused, even though he would have given me a ring that boosted my health by 3%, and that would have been quite useful. But anyhow, just talking to him will award me an achievement for discovering his covenant. For the most part, the Pursuer wasn't too bad. There was the occasional janky hitbox where I swear I didn't get hit. However, I did acquire the Rapier, which is regarded as a solid choice for terrible players such as myself. The boss is weak to strafing right, and the damage from the Rapier was pretty solid. I had a few close calls, but eventually I did manage to defeat the Pursuer. I then got kidnapped by a bird and dropped into a new location, but the pathway forward was locked, so I backtracked to another location, the No Man's Wharf. This location is home to the Flexile Sentry. The boss was unique as the room floods during the fight, restricting your movement. However, even with this handicap, the boss was no match for the power of the Rapier, and so after his defeat, I set sail back to the Lost Bastille. But before taking on the next boss, I got an achievement for using a Branch of Yore, which is an item that can free certain NPCs. I used the item to save a petrified girl, and giving her some spare armor I had lying around awards me the Change of Clothes achievement. Now the boss in the Lost Bastille I mentioned is known as the Lost Sinner, and boy was this a bloodbath, especially because the room is pitch dark, which disables the lock-on function, so I just ended up getting railed from behind. This fight right here was a true test of skill, and the only way to beat the boss was to get good, or you could kill the ruined sentinels first, which was much easier than the Lost Sinner, as their armors are like made out of tinfoil, and upon their defeat I get a key which allows me to light the flame in the boss arena. This re-enables the lock-on function. Now that I can properly see and lock on to the boss, the fight was a piece of cake, and only took a few more attempts before I can take down the Lost Sinner. With her defeated, I then get access to a primal bonfire, which is different from a regular bonfire as these ones give out achievements. So rekindling the first bonfire awards me said achievement. I then adventure out towards Earthen's Peak, where I kill a gang fight between hundreds of skeletons and a fight against Jabba the Hutt's cousin, the Covetous Demon. They both were cakewalks. The next boss was a naked snake woman. I battled this snake inside a literal pool of poison. A quick tip, you can burn down this windmill to remove the poison pool and make the fight 100 times easier. Without the help of the poison, the fight was pretty mid. However, just after killing her, you can take an elevator to the Iron Keep, the best location in the game in my opinion. It's just mind-boggling. The next boss was Quaylag's cousin, but this time as a scorpion. Just watch out for her magic attacks, and when she burrows under the ground, just run loops around the cement and she can't get you. So besides those two things, the boss was easy. Next up, I killed a room full of cripples and a priest who turned to the dark side. Besides main bosses, the bosses in Dark Souls 2 are kinda lackluster. This follows as the next boss found inside a massive 20-foot hole in Majula, the Rat Gang. Before the actual boss comes out, you have to kill 10 rats, and when the real boss shows up, it's just a slightly stronger regular rat. But that's not why I'm here. See, after the boss is defeated, you can join the Sewer Covenant, which awards me an achievement. Moving through the area, I arrive at the worst location in any Souls game, the Black Gulch. Who thought that this place was a good idea? From statues that poison you in an instant to crab hands that take your life privileges away. However, the one good thing about this location is that it doesn't have a mediocre boss. The boss is the Rotten, otherwise known as Discord mods. The fight is like a dance, you just hit and run, which is pretty boring, but I'll take what I can get. The Rotten was also guarding the next primal bonfire, so that means an achievement. I then located the next mini-boss, the Executioner's Chariot, which had the coolest entry but the easiest boss. The horse runs loops and kills the skeletons blocking the way, so once it gets into a 1v1 there isn't a challenge anymore. However, it is guarding the Brotherhood of Blood Covenant, where I can buy some pyromancies for later. Back in the No Man's Wharf, I talked to the last NPC and he relocates to Majula, awarding me the Gathering of Exiles achievement. Inside the Lost Bastille, I talk to my good friend McDuff and inherit his gear, thus awarding me an achievement. Right after, I then tell him to reinforce my black steel katana to its limits and get another achievement. There were a few more covenants I needed to find, so I hunted them down, starting with the Belguard's Covenant and moving into the Best Covenant, rest in peace Sunlight Bro, then the Protector's Covenant, and the second to last covenant I can get was the Abysmal Covenant. Now it is time for the epic Dark Souls 2 montage. Wasn't that just a cool montage? Moving on to the end of the game, where I decide to go back and get all the achievements for inheriting people's equipment. If you messed up some of the NPC quests, you can use a bonfire aesthetic to retry them instead of doing a completely new playthrough. The people I get equipment from are Captain Drummond inside a giant memory, which you can access after acquiring the Ashen Mist Heart. To get Vengarl's equipment, all you have to do is talk to him and eventually he'll give you his gear. Up next with Lucatel of Mira, who is my favorite as her tale is so tragic. She is slowly losing herself and becoming hollow, and in the last moment she asks you to remember her. Bernhardt of Judo requires me to kill the King of the Giants again, before I got the Moonlight Greatsword for his achievement. Inside the graveyard I find the last NPC who teaches me his last gesture that I need for an achievement. I now had to defeat the Hollow King Vendrick. This fight wasn't too difficult as I had acquired 4 out of the 5 giant souls, allowing me to deal more damage to Vendrick. Vendrick. Overall, the fight was more about stamina management, as when Vendrick does attack, he hits like a semi-truck running into a family of 4. Winning the fight awards me the Vendrick achievement for defeating Vendrick. Now it's on to the last boss I need to defeat. Before that, however, I decided to finalize my build by reallocating my stats, and to style on the bosses, I maxed out my dex stat for fun. Anyway, with my newfound power, I ultimately decided to kill the Fume Knight first, before the final boss, to prove myself. The Fume Knight is immune to poison, so my Manslayer Katana was heavily nerfed. However, the Chaos Blade wasn't. The problem with the Chaos Blade was that in order to use it, I had to lose 50 HP per hit, so my options to use it were very scarce. That doesn't stop me from kicking ass though, and that is what I did, as all I did was learn the Fume Knight's attack. It wasn't perfect, but I did well enough to secure a victory. Oh, and I also changed to the Sunlight Covenant, so now enemies don't deal more damage and kick my ass. Now it is time for the final boss. For this fight, I summon the boys, and we go to town. Eventually, the second phase begins, and I now have to fight death. After death is defeated, the third phase begins, and I have to fight an amalgamation of tree and fire god. Luckily, there are no more phases, and I get to walk out of the arena and bring the world to chaos. After the credits roll, I get an achievement for seeing the end, and now that the final boss was defeated, I can talk to the man in the mansion and get his inheritance, which awards me an achievement. The last thing I had to do was grab all hexes, sorceries, miracles, and pyromancies. In doing so, I get the Dark Soul achievement for unlocking all achievements in Dark Souls 2. Thanks for watching. Now check out this video where I get all the achievements in Dark Souls Remastered.